We on? Good. Welcome. This is our session to talk through the new ASR system for giving notice of environmental issues. If that's not what you're here for, find your right place. I do want to welcome everybody. Just a brief bit of background on what we're doing here. This system was introduced. It came out of originally out of the Gulf petition, where a number of environmental groups petitioned that for a number of actions that the Commission should take on registered towers, focusing on the Gulf of Mexico, but the issues were really nationwide. And the court issued an order telling us that we had to change some things about our system. In particular, that led to the remand order that came down last December. And that addressed two things in particular. One of them is an interim rule to file environmental assessments for towers that are over 450 feet in height in order to address their potential impacts on migratory birds. And the other one is the requirement that all applications for antenna structure registration should be made available for the public to comment on them for a period in order to raise potential environmental issues. It was in response to that order from the court that the remand order came out in December, laying out the details. Since that time, we've been getting approval under the Paperwork Reduction Act, as well as doing the programming of the system. We now have OMB approval. We're expecting the system to come up very shortly, and wanted to walk you through here, give folks a chance to understand what is this new system that you're going to need to use to provide the environmental notice. Just a little bit on the timing of it. We're expecting this to come up probably in early June. The way it's going to, it will become effective when it's published, when the notice of the OMB approval is published in the Federal Register. The way it's probably going to roll out is that on a Friday evening after the close of work, the ASR system is going to be shut down. Over the weekend, our technicians are going to be working hard putting all these changes into place. Monday morning, if it comes up and you log into the ASR system, then it's going to be the new system. And any new applications filed as of that date will have to go through the notice process. Any applications that are pending as of that date will continue to be processed under the old regime. And to comply with the legal requirements under Paperwork Reduction Act and under the Commission setup, that Monday also the notice would be published in the Federal Register saying that the new rules are now effective. I'm going to turn this over to Diane in just a moment. We will have an opportunity for questions after the presentation. Those of you who are in the room, you'll just raise your hand. We'll come to you with the mic because this is being broadcast on the web. If you're on the web, you can send your questions to livequestions@fcc.gov, and we'll read them here and take them again. You can send them in any time, but we'll address them after Diane is done with her presentation. Diane Dupert is going to walk you through the system. As many of you know, Diane is a senior analyst in our technology division in our Gettysburg office. She's the person who knows more about ASR than I think anybody on earth. And she's also been working, very closely with us and with the programmers on setting up this notice system. We've worked with her on many other things before, TCNS, the E106 system. She's really good at what she does, and I'm going to let Diane walk you through this now.
Thank you. As Jeff stated, I'm going to show you how the antenna structure registration system has been modified to incorporate the environmental notice process that was adopted in the order back in December. The changes involved form modifications and system modifications. The Form 854 has some changes in regards to administrative data, where we're going to collect the county and a zip code for the tower location. We've added a new filing purpose for replacement towers. We have a new question to indicate the proposed marking and lighting on a tower. And we have a group of questions in the what we call an environmental compliance section. The Form 601 was changed to accept the Form 854 file number in lieu of the antenna structure registration number. And the 854R, you will now see the county as part of the structure location information, and we've also added the structure type to the 854R print. System modifications included, of course, the ASR data entry. We've incorporated changes from the 854 form itself, and we've redesigned the filing interface for the new purpose, modifications, and the replacement tower purpose. The ASR application search was changed, of course, to accommodate those form changes. The antenna structure registration search was changed to provide new search criteria, including the county and zip code for the tower locations. And the online pleading system was updated to allow requests for further environmental review to be filed online. We've also developed a new website to display the proposed tower registrations on the environmental notice for that 30-day period, and we'll take a closer look at that. The environmental notice process is required for new tower registrations where there are let me back up. The environmental notification process is required for all new tower registrations unless another federal agency has taken responsibility for the environmental review or an emergency waiver has been granted. Also, the environmental notice process is required to modifications to existing tower registrations if the antenna being placed on the existing tower increases the height of that tower by more than 10% or 20 feet, whichever is greater. A modification to a tower where lighting is being added to a previously unlit tower, or lighting is being modified from a more preferred lighting configuration to a less preferred lighting configuration. Those tower modifications require the environmental notice process. Also, a new environmental process may be required for amendments to pending applications where there is a change in the type of structure, change in the coordinates of the location of the tower, an increase in the overall AGL height, or a change in the lighting from a more preferred to a less preferred configuration. Those antenna structure registration filings that are exempt from the environmental notice process are replacement tower filings, minor modifications that would include just administrative data, the height being lowered, or the lighting was changed to a more preferred lighting style, or lighting was removed from a tower. Purposes like ownership changes, administrative updates, dismantlements, duplicate requests, or cancellations are exempt from the environmental notice process. The process for submitting an antenna structure registration filing that requires the environmental notice process now requires two parts of an 854 filing. And the first part is filed with the owner and contact information, the tower location information, an indication of the proposed lighting. The applicant will then also provide the date that they want the commission to post that filing on our website for the 30-day requirement. And the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration's clearance is not required at the filing of the Part 1, but it may be included if you already have it. Once that 854 form is submitted, the applicant will receive a file number, which is to be included in the local notice of the proposed tower that is published in the local newspaper. And on the date that is indicated on the 854 form, the filing will then be posted on our website. The registration filing is on our website for a 30-day comment period where members of the public will have an opportunity to review the application and determine whether they want to request additional environmental processing. If it is determined that the application does not require an EA or that no other environmental processing is required, the application will be made ready for certification. After 40 days, that application is flagged ready for Part 2 to be filed. And Part 2 requires the applicant to amend that 854 filing, provide the FAA study number if it wasn't provided in the first part, and provide the local notice date and certify that the tower will not have a significant impact. At this point, when it's submitted and there's all required information has been provided, the 854 form will be deemed complete and be granted and a registration number issued. And now I'm going to log into our test environment. So this system you're going to see is live. I'm actually going to go in and show you how Part 1 and Part 2 of an 854 form is filed. Logging into the system is the same. You enter your FRN and password. You come to the My ASR Manager screen as before and click on the Manager ASR numbers. Finally got loaded. This is the same look as before as far as with the select a purpose screen. You'll see all the purposes for the 854 form at the top here, including the new purpose RE. There's a section down at the bottom of the screen. It's divided into two sections where you have selective viewing of applications that are on national notice and those that are ready for certification. So when an application has been posted for 30 days and after the 40 days is deemed ready for certification, you can come here, go directly to the amend certifying application, and it will display to you only those applications that are ready to be certified. This is the new look and feel for the data entry screens to file a new purpose application. The form itself is broken out into 4 screens of information. These steps over here on the side of the screen show you what page of the form you're filing right now. These are actually active links that you can jump from one page of the filing to another. One of the data entry features we've added to the form is to pre-fill from a previous application. So if you've already have antenna structure registration filings on file with us, we have this button to pre-fill from a previous application, and the system will go out into your most recently filed application and pre-fill the owner data onto the screen for you. Or you can manually data enter each field. One of the new data fields we are collecting on the form is the entity type, which we would have you indicate that the type of owner entity is for the tower itself. You can use the Save and Continue button at the bottom to go to the next screen, which is the contact information screen. Again, we have another data entry ease of filing button. It's a pre-fill from the ownership information page. So if your contact information is the same as the owner information that you completed on the previous page, you can click this button, pre-fill this page with the same data. The antenna technical data page, again, you're going to provide all the structure location information, the coordinates, the location description, city, county, and state, the technical details as far as the height, the ground elevation, and the type of structure. The proposed marking and lighting are based on the FAA lighting styles and the FAA study number and issue date, which in this part 1 of the filing, it is not required. One of the other pre-fill options that we've added to the system is to copy site information from a tower construction notification filing. So you would enter the TCNS number and click the pre-fill, and it will copy the relevant data from that TCNS notification into your antenna structure registration. There are certain data you would have to add, as in the zip code, and you would have to select your proposed marking and lighting. And save and continue. This page is the environmental compliance page, where we have a series of questions. Depending on how certain questions are answered, other questions are required. So the page will actually flow based on how you answer these first couple questions. Does the waiver request a waiver of the Commission's rules for the environmental notification? Answer no, and then you get is another federal agency taking responsibility for environmental review of the antenna structure? If you would answer yes, we give you 2 options to indicate why another federal agency is taking that responsibility. Provide the agency name. I'm going to go back and clear this. And if you answer no to the waiver question and no to whether or not a federal agency has taken responsibility, then we provide you the field to indicate the date, what we call the national notice date, the date that you want the application to be posted on our website. If you are submitting an environmental assessment, you indicate yes or no. If you answer yes that you are uploading an environmental assessment, the same attachment utility is part of the system. And I'm trying to get that to load. Okay. We have a few new environmental assessment and related application documents. We have a few new environmental assessment and related application documents. We have a few new environmental assessment and related application documents. We have a few new environmental assessment and related application documents. We have a few new environmental assessment and related application documents. We have a few new environmental assessment attachment types, the FONSI, the environmental impact statement when required, a record of decision, and a waiver attachment type if a waiver is requested. If a page has, if you save and continue after you have data entered information, and the system will edit that page at that time, and if something doesn't meet the edits or something is missing, the system will tell you. Like in this case, I had indicated that I was attaching an environmental assessment. Because I didn't upload one and I tried to continue to submit, the system's going to say, well, you've got to upload an environmental assessment attachment. So I'm going to change my answer to no and save and continue. Then you're presented with this application summary page, which gives you a general information about the purpose and the date, the national notice date you gave us, some owner information, and some information about the antenna structure. If there were errors in your application or you see something that you need to go back and correct, you can use these active application step links to go back to that page, make a correction, and then come back to the summary. And then you can actually click back to the application summary page using these application steps. To finalize your submission, you would do the electronic signature. And you submit your application. You will then get a confirmation screen giving you your file number and again the same summary of your application data. And you can also then print your reference copy of the A54 form that you just completed. Okay, it doesn't look like it's going to open. So we'll go back to home, and this will take you back to the manager page, and then you can click to go back into your select a purpose screen. Once that first part one of your A54 application is submitted, on the date that you have requested us to post it on our website, you can access our website for the list of the environmental applications on environmental notice from our ASR application search homepage, and you'll be able to access it from the ASR homepage itself. This is what our webpage looks like for listing of those applications that are on environmental notice. We have the file number, the purpose, the owner name, the height of the structure, the type of structure, the city, county, and state where it's located, and whether or not an environmental assessment is attached, and the proposed lighting. The proposed lighting is a code, but we have a legend that interprets that code for you. And then we have a column that lists the due date of any environmental request for that filing. Okay. You can print this page. We have a print link here that will allow you to actually print this page in the format it's in. You can also export results, which are just the results of this page. And you can download it into a text or CSV file. And the file number of each filing is an actual hyperlink to go to the application details. and it will allow you to review any other details that you don't see on that posting. And if the filing had an environmental assessment, you will be able to click on that link, come to the details, and review those attachments. For members of the public who want to file a request for further environmental review, as you're looking at this page, we have a button that is titled File Environmental Request, and it will give you this interim window with some information about what should be included with a request and some steps on how to file that environmental request. This page can be printed for your reference. If you click the Continue button, it will take you to our online pleadings module. Where you would use the ASR environmental request pleading type, complete the filer and contact information, upload your environmental request, and submit. That request then is uploaded to the application, and a notification is sent to FCC staff, who will review that request and be in contact in regards to whether or not an environmental review would be extended. Once that application has been on our website for the 40 days or 30 days, and then allowing 40 days for manual environmental requests, the application will be ready for certification. And I have to log back in 579. An application ready for certification, to amend and certify that application, you would click here, click on Continue, and it will display to you those applications. Again, this is all test data, so I have quite a few applications that are ready for certification. But you would highlight your application and continue, and then it will take you out of that applet and back into the new data entry screens. Your purpose now is an amendment of a pending application, and it is pre-filled with the data that you originally submitted. And you can make administrative changes, like if your contact person has changed, you can make those administrative changes in this amendment to certify. Using the application link step link, I came to the antenna's technical data screen, where the only thing I need to add is my FAA study number. And save and continue. Okay, now I'm gonna see the environmental compliance questions that I already answered, and then the certification is a question: does the applicant certify that that a grant of authorizations at this location would not have a significant environmental effect pursuant to the FCC rules? And you answer yes, and then select that basis for certification, which in this case, the environmental notification has been completed. The FCC has notified the applicant that an environmental assessment is not required under the section of the rules, and the construction does not fall into one of the categories of section 1.1307. Or the FONSI may have issued a finding of no significant impact. After the basis for certification is selected, then you would provide the local notice date, which will be the day of or before the national notice date. Save and continue. I get my application summary again. I sign and submit. And then I get my confirmation screen. This application did not auto grant it offline. It's the purpose or the status is still pending. But if it would have auto granted, it would have provided you the registration number here on the screen. And again, you would be able to print the reference copy of the 854 form with that registration number as on it. Back to home and back to the select a purpose screen. Modifications of antenna structure registrations have that new online filing screen. The replacement tower also has that. Purposes like AU, administrative update, or cancellation continue to stay within the applet that you are used to seeing. But changes have been made in the administrative update and the ownership filing change to collect the new data fields for the owner and contact, which would be the entity type, a fax number, and email address. So those screens still look and feel the same for those purposes. We've added a few nice things here to view and print a list of your applications. Like if you have a large group of applications that you may have that are on national notice and you want to see the file numbers and exactly a list of those applications, you can click on that view a list, come to this screen and print it. The same for those list of applications that are ready for certification. The antenna structure registration search data screens are the same, except we've added the county to search by a county. You can select a state, select a county or multiple counties, and submit to retrieve antenna structure registrations at that location. For the changes to this Form 601 for NULS, for the 601 on the location screen, choosing a fixed location where you would either indicate a registration number or an A before, you can now select file number and enter the file number of the pending 854 application. To be able to reference a Form 854 file number on a 601 filing, that application must be pending. It must already have FAA clearance, and it must be posted on our website during that 30-day period. Entering a file number is the same as a registration number. If you use the enter key, it will pre-fill the 601 with the location data of the tower. You would indicate the structure type and answer the environmental assessment question. If an environmental assessment was included on the 854 form, you would indicate yes here. If there wasn't an EA submitted with the 854 and you're using the file number on your 601 filing, you would answer the EA question no. If at a later date the 854 form is amended to include an EA, the 601 applicant must also come back in and amend the 601 to indicate that an EA was added to the 854 form. I think that's all I had to show as far as system changes. So if we want to if you had anything else to add to what I said, or do you want to take questions?
I think we'll open it up to questions at this point. Just briefly before that, I realized I forgot to introduce myself at the beginning of this. I'm Jeffrey Steinberg. I'm Deputy Chief of the Spectrum and Competition Policy Division. On my left is Aaron Goldschmidt, who is Assistant Chief in the same division. And, we'll be available, along with Diane here. We'll work together to answer any questions that you have. And I expect there are some. Once again, if you're in the hall, raise your hand. We'll bring you the mic, and you can ask questions using the microphone. If you're online, you can send your questions to livequestions@fcc.gov. And please do identify who you are and the organization that you're with when you're asking a question. We've got a couple of them in online here, so why don't we start out with these? Okay, so this question, is the tower owner the only, this is from David Ellis at Airfire Mobile. Is the tower owner the only company required to submit and have the ASR, or do all co-locators need their own ASR? An example, SBC owns the tower, and do we need the we, I guess, being the co-locator, need to do an ASR in addition to SBCs. No, none of that is changing under the new rules. It's the, the tower owner registers the tower, other than very unusual circumstances. But generally, it's the tower owner. The tower owner is required to notify the co-locators of the registration. If something changes, like an increase in height that would require a new registration or a modification, again, that's the tower owner's responsibility. The co-locator is responsible for assuring itself that the tower is registered, but again, it will get the notification from the tower owner. Says Edward Richardson of Liberty Towers, if you say no to the waiver question and it then asks for a date to list on web, how long out should that date be, 30 days or more? Okay, so you say no to the waiver question and no, presumably, to the federal lands question. So those are the two triggers to then have to go through the process, through the notice process, and you will then have to enter the date that it needs to be on the web, that we are going to post it. The only requirement for that date is it must be on or after the date that you're going to give the local notice. So you may know at the time you're entering this in. I would recommend that you be pretty close to the process. You may already know, have worked out with your local newspaper, you understand the local newspaper's process, that it's going to be published on X date. You can enter in that date. If you know that you just need to go into the local, you've got your local notice in the newspaper already, you're still going to have to add the file number, because that's part of the local notice, so that people reading the notice can know how to file. So it won't be totally submitted to the paper, but maybe you know that you can put it into the paper today. It's going to be run in the paper on Friday. You can put in Friday's date. If you don't know what date it's going to be, you might want to leave yourself a little wiggle room, next Tuesday or something. But that's the only requirement. If things slip with the local paper, then you'll need to go in and change your notice date, which you can do any time up until, when we post it. If you thought it was going to run on Friday and the paper lost your submission or something, and it turns out it's not going to run until next Tuesday or the following Friday, just go back in, amend your application, change the notice date. That is important to remember to do that, because as Diane showed you, at the end of the process, when you get to part 2, you will need to enter the date that the local notice happened. If that date is after the date that we posted it for national notice, you're going to have to go back and do the notice all over again. But that's the only constraint there.
Do the national notice all over again.
Right. Thanks. Okay, Laura Mizrahi of Communications Technologies. Will applications that have been started but are not yet completed remain in the new system longer than 30 days, which is the max with the current system? Let you take that, Diane.
The answer's right.
Yes, it is.
That requirement will not change. The system hasn't been changed in that regard. If a saved application is not completed and actually submitted, it will be deleted by the system in 30 days, after 30 days.
Greg Swanson at My Canopy Mart. Please explain preferred tower lighting versus less preferred. Okay, these are there are a few tiers of tower lighting, 3 tiers, and these are set out in the remand order, but very roughly, or actually precisely, actually to uncomplicate it, the most preferred lighting is no lighting. The middle level is lighting that does not include red steady lights. And then the least preferred lighting is lighting that includes red steady lights, which the current science indicates is the most likely to be hazardous to migratory birds. So if you are changing from a less preferred to a more preferred tier lighting, that is either eliminating the lights or changing steady lights to not steady lights, or if you're within the same tier, you're going from one lighting scheme that has steady lights to another lighting scheme that has steady lights, then that does not require going out on the notice. The only lighting changes that will need to go on the local and national notice, either as an amendment to a pending application or as a change to a tower that's already there, would be if you're going to a less preferred tier. In other words, either adding lights to a tower that didn't have lights before, or changing from a tower that did not have any red steady lights to something that will include red steady lights. If you're doing those, then the notice is required. Second question here, will construction of a tower be denied in locations where it's known that migratory birds fly? Not necessarily, certainly. Now, under the current interim rules that are going into place and that will go into place at the same time as this notice system, we will be requiring environmental assessments for towers that are over 450 feet in height. For those, you will need to address what the effects would be on migratory birds. We will review the assessment. Part of the assessment will certainly be, are there a lot of migratory birds at this location? Based on what you submit and our review of the submission, we will either decide based on the environmental assessment that no, there's not a significant impact because of all the characteristics of this tower, and we would issue a FONSI, or we could decide that this tower will require an environmental impact statement, which the FCC is required to prepare, although we'd certainly be looking to you for a lot of assistance in preparing that. Aside from that, the other way that migratory bird issues could come up is if a member of the public raises an objection and says, we think there should be an EA for this tower, or we think that if it was something that was submitted with an EA because it's in a floodplain, for instance, a member of the public says, we think that this EA should also address migratory birds. That's where we would then come in and address that request, saying, yes, there's enough, and there'd be a pleading cycle on it. You'd have a chance to respond to that 10 days. And then we would address that request and either say, yes, there is enough here that we think this does require an EA, in which case you would then file the EA and we would evaluate it. Or we would say, no, there's not enough here. This is just somebody's speculation about birds, but there's no evidence there, in which case we would say, no, there's no EA needed, and we would clear that for certification. It's also possible that we could, and looking at the submission, we do have the authority on our own motion as the Bureau to decide that an environmental assessment is required even for something that's not categorically excluded. So that is another possibility that's out there. But other than that, in the routine case, at this point, migratory birds are not any more part of the consideration than they are under the pre-existing rules. that's building off that may change based on the programmatic environmental assessment, and there's further rulemaking that will be happening from the Commission, but that's future. That's not any current changes.
I have a question here from William Layton with Wilkinson Barker and Now. He says, Diane mentioned when completing Part 2 of the process that the ASR filing was offlined instead of auto-granted. What determines whether the Form 854 is auto-granted or offlined? If offlined, when will the ASR be granted? How long will it take? Most 854s are auto-granted. If it is offline, it would be just like it is today, that it needs reviewed for the obstruction marking and lighting requirements. If the FAA approval does not specifically state chapter numbers for the obstruction lighting, the 854 filing does offline for FCC review, just like it does today, and they are typically granted within 24 hours. We don't see that changing, and it just allows us to review them and determine the FCC paragraphs for the obstruction marking and lighting.
Okay, 3 questions here. Charles Surya of Sprint. And it looks like the first one is for Aaron and me, and the other 2 I may look to Diane to help me with. I think I want to confirm at any rate. Can you please explain your statement, other federal agency is reviewing your structure? Which agency and why would a structure need review from another agency? The major circumstance there is a tower that's constructed on federal land. BLM, National Park Service, another landholding agency. We generally defer to the other agency, the landholding agency, as the lead agency for environmental review under those circumstances. That's been longstanding practice. And under those circumstances, since the tower is going through their process, it would not need to go through our notification process. The only requirement is that you submit, presume in most instances, the EA that you provided to that agency and the FONSI that agency issued as proof that they've gone through the review. If the agency did an environmental impact statement, then you would give us the EIS and the record of decision. But that's the major circumstance. There could be circumstances where we had an agreement, different circumstances where we had an agreement with a federal agency, a grant-making agency, for instance. Normally, we take the lead on those, but if there were an agreement for the other agency to take the lead, then you would also provide that information. Second question, are you still going to use meters versus feet? I don't think there's any change in that. And so for Form 601, you want the FAA ASN number?
The FAA Aeronautical Study Number. I guess they want clarification on.
I guess. Yeah.
If you are referencing a Form 854 file number on your 601 filing, that 854 form needs to have FAA approval before it can be used in a 601 filing. So you don't list the actual FAA study number on the 601. The FAA study number has to be part of the 854 filing.
Okay. Additional questions, Charles Surya. So how long is that process when there is an impact on migratory birds? Well, that could vary depending on all the circumstances of the case. If there is an impact, if that means enough to require an environmental assessment, then
No, when there is, that's beyond that.
well, yeah. I'm interpreting the question here. If the question is how long does it take us to process an EA to determine if there is a significant impact, it's case by case. I think we would aim to get them through without an undue delay in the processing, but it realistically could be a months-long process. But because it's going to require the expert review, perhaps consultation with the Fish and Wildlife Service. Really depends. Some of them, especially once we get going on them, hopefully many of them will become fairly routine. But there's no way to. If the review of the EA determines that there is a significant impact, then it requires the environmental impact statement process, which is a lengthy process. That's
Or the possibility of changing the structure so that it would no longer have that.
true. Or there's a possibility of, at that point, you might want to modify what you're doing, if possible, in order to avoid the significant impact. And it would be up to the FCC whether even to do an EIS on it. We could determine that the nature of that the tower is such that we would not go forward with the EIS. Timeline for further investigation and response from the tower owner, et cetera. I think I may have answered that. Again, the first step, if there is something was filed without an EA and there's a request for environmental review, either on migratory birds or on some other environmental issue, the immediate timeline there is 10 days to file a response to that, and then the party requesting the review would have 5 business days to file a reply. Again, our goal is to act on those quickly. Certainly, if there's not much basis for it, I think our aim is to handle those in a matter of days. If there's enough there that requires a serious consideration, it may take longer. We might err on the side of environmental assessments, or you might decide that, you would just go ahead with the environmental assessment at that point, but that's an individual decision. It's case by case. Again, I can't commit to anything.
There's also the possibility of needing a request for additional EA because they didn't address migratory birds, and migratory birds needs to be.
Right.
You want me to cover that?
That there could be cases where the request is because you submitted an EA because you were in a floodplain and it was a request for more information, and again, we would take that into consideration in the same kind of time frame. Robert Vitanza, AT&T. The instructions for the new ASR indicate that where another federal agency takes responsibility for environmental review, an applicant must identify that agency and attach the environmental assessment and FONSI or the EIS and record of decision. What do we do where there is no EA or FONSI? Under NEPA, we are not permitted to use another agency's categorical exclusion. So if the other agency did not determine that that it rose to the level of needing if the other agency categorically excluded it, then we need to do our own categorical exclusion also, which means going through the notice process. You can avoid our notice process if the other agency did an EA and issued a FONSI, because then we can accept them as the lead agency on the EA. Oh, another one. Greg DeBona, U.S. Cellular, please define interim with regards to the 450-foot EA requirement. Assuming the status is tied to the final PEA, will that requirement soon change and take on a permanent status now that the PEA has been finalized? Yes, interim is yes and no. Interim is interim until the Commission acts upon a rulemaking proceeding following the PEA that was issued in March. The PEA was issued by the Wireless Bureau and memorialized our conclusions regarding significant impacts upon migratory birds under various different options. What the Commission needs the next steps in that are for the Commission to issue a notice of proposed rulemaking. Following comments on the notice of proposed rulemaking, then the Commission will come out with rules which may put into place a new regime for when towers require environmental assessments based upon potential impacts on migratory birds. So yes, that the 450-foot requirement may change to another requirement upon conclusion of the additional rulemaking process following the PEA. We are, realistically, just given the rulemaking process, several months out from that happening. I can't really put a time frame on it. We are working to get the further NPRM out in the relatively near term, and that would likely have proposed rules in it. So that's a judgment. But then there's a comment period following that, and then a period for staff to consider it and the commission to act. So until all that is done, 450 feet is the standard.
I want to point out and show you our antenna structure registration help websites. We've published some help articles regarding the new environmental notice process, and I'll give you the website URL here when I'm done. The site gives information about registering antenna structures and the new environmental notification process. The layout of the site is divided into categories of general information, have an overview of ASR, pleadings, rules and regulations. Then we have a section of information for applicants, an article about environmental assessments, an article about the environmental notification process itself, filing purposes, articles on each purpose, a link to forms, information about logins and passwords, a link to the PEA. We also have a section of information for consumers and links to related systems. If you would click on the environmental notification process link and take you to that article, you'll see related articles to the environmental notification process itself, giving more information about the local and national notice, filing service-specific applications, information about review from another federal agency. This link will take you back to the main help screen. The filing purposes, again, will take you to filing an article about filing a new antenna structure registration, and then links to all the other related filing purposes.
Also want to point out other places for information are, of course, the remand order itself, which is at 26 FCC record 16700, or it's FCC number 11-181, and that has a lot of detail, and Appendix E to that order is a lot of the nuts and bolts. Also, the public notice, DA 12-731, which came out on May 9th, and which you may have looked at, and that may have been how you found out about today's session. But those are two places also, in addition to the help site that Diane pointed out, where there's a lot of detail explaining, what the process is and what the requirements are. Any other questions, either in the room or online? Who has the microphone? Cecilia.
Hi, Diane. My name is Bill Hackett. I'm with T-Mobile. And I have two questions for you. When doing an administrative update under the current system, when you do a global update, you get a box at the end that says any unsubmitted and pending applications will be deleted. Is that going to change? Because kind of going back to the question earlier, obviously we don't want to have these applications sitting there that are going to be deleted if we do an administrative update. And then secondly, what type of tech support is going to be available once this system goes live?
Any pending application would be an administrative update. It would not be, if you were doing an administrative update to a registration that you had a modification pending environmental notice, that pending modification would not be deleted. Okay, so that message that you get means that if you have a pending administrative update application, it's the same purpose.
It's not actually coming up. I mean, it's part of the administrative update, but it's not a pending administrative update. So if you have, say, for instance, there are unsubmitted applications, we're waiting to get additional information, regular 854s.
Right.
that's where the pop-up box was saying those will all be deleted once you complete that administrative update.
You mean the saved application? Would be
I think it's,
deleted.
if I recall, I just did this not too long ago, and I did a global administrative update. And I think
Yeah.
it said pending and unsubmitted applications will be deleted. And of course, you can only do the administrative update once and get that message. So
Right. But it's not going to delete any. It won't delete any pending application.
okay, I just want to make sure that that's a change in the new system. It won't delete that.
No, it won't. It will not delete any pending
Okay,
application.
good. All right.
No.
Okay. And then just the second question is on the tech support.
Oh, the tech support, our ULS hotline will be available to answer all your questions. They're being trained on how the new system works, so they're going to be there to help you. And if they can't, they'll come to me. But so yeah, our normal ULS.
Thank you.
Hi, Bill Sill from Wilkinson Barker Nauer. I had three related procedural questions dealing with the request for further environmental processing. The first one is the addition of the 10-day period. Could you please comment, does that leave unaffected the requirement that the request be filed within the 30-day public notice period?
That is correct. It must be filed within the 30 days. That's basically an allowance for requests that are filed by mail in order to make it to the staff.
Okay, that's helpful. Question two is, if the request is filed by mail and received by the FCC within the 30-day public notice period, but the applicant receives its service by mail after the 30-day public notice period, when does the 10-day opposition period start to run?
The 10-day opposition period generally, I mean, as it's specified in the rules, runs from the 30 days. That's what we specified. I think under those circumstances, you could ask for an extension, and I think we'd probably be inclined to grant it.
So the extension would be requesting whatever time period it took to have a full 10 days
Right.
to file the opposition?
Yes.
Okay. And the third and last question is, what if you had a paper filing by a requestor and it was filed within the 30 days, it was received within 30 days by the FCC, but there was no service provided upon the applicant? At that point, how do we calculate the 10 days for the opposition?
I think we would give you guidance on that.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, case by case. Okay, please see question. Richard Rubino, Leuston Markovsky. To clarify a prior question, if an application is saved, okay, this looks like it's for you. If an application is saved, maybe. Oh, let me read it first. If an application is saved in ASR at the time the system changes, will the applicant be under the old system, which covers the way the application was prepared, or under the new system due to the effective date of the new rules? If it was saved and not yet completed as accepted for filing, I think it's going to go by when it's filed, or when at this point when it goes in when Part 1 is completed is going to be what's going to have to come up under the no rules. If we're talking about something that was already filed and accepted for filing under the old system, then it's going to be under the old rules. Edward Richardson, Liberty Towers. In conclusion, one should not sit down to file an 854 until they have the following complete: newspaper notification completed, date, FAA study issued, and date. A true EA is determined to be required or not. If an EA is required, then one would need to wait to file until the EA is completed. Does this process sound correct? Not necessarily. I mean, I think there are a number of judgment calls that you are going to need to make as to your individual situation, really for all three of those factors, for different reasons. If you wanted to file something and you're absolutely sure that this is the last thing you're going to have to file and you're not going to go back and change anything, then I would say yes, you wait for all three of those things. But there may be reasons that you would want to file. For instance, newspaper notification completed date, you might have a situation where you're dealing with a small-town newspaper. People have mentioned this to me. Publishes weekly. They can't really give you any guarantees of when it's going to be published. So you could be caught chasing your tail if you're waiting for knowing the date when they're going to publish before you put in for the notice, particularly since you can't submit the final version of the newspaper notice until you get the ASR file number from us, which requires completing Part 1. So you may have to have a little give there, give yourself a little wiggle room, or be prepared to go back in and modify the date if you don't meet the notice date that's expected. FAA study issued, depends where you are in the process. We have set this up so you can go in and put in your anticipated lighting in Part 1 of the application and not put in the FAA study number. Then, when you do Part 2, you go in and you do the FAA study number. If it's the same lighting or a more preferred lighting, then you're fine. The only risk you're taking, which in many instances I think is a fairly small risk, since you can usually, in my understanding, predict pretty well what the FAA is going to come up with, is that if they do come up with a less preferred lighting than you thought, then you would need to redo the process. But again, that's your judgment call. You may find it advantageous to get the notification going earlier, and if you haven't completed the FAA process, as long as you have a sense of you're pretty sure what the FAA is going to say, that may make sense for you. Determining whether an EA is required or not, let me say one advantage one reason you may want to come in before you've determined that is, and again, it's your call based on the facts and your business preferences, but the Section 106 process requires a local notice. You can combine the Section 106 notice with the local notice that we are requiring for NEPA purposes in a single notice. But in order to do that, that has to be done before or at the same time as the submission to the State Historic Preservation Officer under 106. Therefore, you would not know for sure at that point whether you have an adverse effect on a historic property that might end up requiring an EA. So, you might choose to leave it open and just come in and certify it at that point. Again, it's up to you what you think makes sense for the process. Charles Surya of Sprint. Is there an expiration date for an application to stay online? Is that the 30 days that you...
No.
No, I think what they're
what they're asking is they have a pending Part 1, and it's taken a long time to get FAA clearance. How long will that Part 1 application stay? And it will stay in the system indefinitely until you withdraw it. A Part 1.
Right.
And if they're waiting for FAA determination, we're not going to delete it after 30 days or anything like that.
Yeah. The one thing which we didn't mention, we're talking about on the Form 601, where you can enter the that's a different issue too, because you have the FAA study number at that point. Right. I may as well mention that too in the written materials, but we didn't come up with it. If you have entered an FAA study number in Form 601, because
file number.
Sorry.
854 file number. If you have
the 854 file number, which you needed the FAA study number, but you needed to have the FAA study number, but what you've entered is the 854 file
number. Right.
Right, in Form 601, because we haven't published because the registration hasn't been issued yet, and you're going into 601 to reserve your frequency. You are going to require to update to every 60 days go into Form 601 and file an amendment to indicate why it's still pending with why you haven't completed the Form 854 filing yet. Something else you're still waiting for the Section 106 process to be completed or something. If it's not, that's with us. If it's with us because we're considering an EA, then we know that. Leslie Wilson, AT&T. Will there be any notices sent to applicants indicating that an ASR was on public notice, is ready for certification, or do we just need to monitor submissions? You will need to monitor them through the link that Diane demonstrated earlier, where you can see all of your certifications. Charles Surya, auto-granted. Can you please explain that once more? And if a registration was auto-granted, is there auto-notification sent to the tower owner via email? Look to Diane on that one.
Okay, when Part 2 is filed or submitted and it is auto-granted, the registration number is assigned immediately. You'll get an online confirmation right then and there. There's no email notification. The 854R will be printed and mailed to the tower owner. So if the tower owner is not the one filing Part 2, they won't get notification of the actual ASR number until they receive the 854R or whoever is submitting Part 2 lets them know. So if the auto grant, the explanation of an auto grant is if when you're filing Part 2 and everything is complete, the FAA study matches the lighting, the proposed lighting, and the FAA study has the chapter numbers that indicate the required marking and lighting. The registration will auto grant, meaning we will issue the registration number for the tower.
Sergio Covarrubias of Blue Sky Communications, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that. What all exactly do we need to give the newspaper for local notice? What the rule specifies for local notice is you must provide all the descriptive information as to the geographic location, configuration, height, and anticipated lighting for the tower. Information regarding the procedure for interested persons to file requests for environmental processing, including any assigned file number. So you would need to put in give them the FAA file number and basically the website for where to go to file any requests. And also must state that such requests may only raise environmental concerns. In addition, if you're combining the NEPA notice and the Section 106 notice in the same newspaper notice, it needs to clarify that objections based on historic preservation concerns go to the applicant and will go through the SHPO pursuant to the Section 106 process. The rule is Section 17.4C3 of the FCC rules. Basically, this whole process, all the rules relating to it, are set out in Section 17.4C.
Appendix here. Or not.
Anything else? Well, we'll be available, to take other questions as if things go up and happen in your working with it, as well as our hotline for technical questions, and encourage you to go there because they know the real nuts and bolts better than we do. And good luck.